This is the percentage of revenue that comes from students at 39 private and public universities in the US. Okay, so you see total expenditure or revenue of this university, say 100, out of 100, how much comes from students? Fees and food and everything. Okay? You see that little bar all the way to the left is 4%. And it says Caltech. You know what California Institute of Technology with send the man to the moon? You know, they get, each year they admit 200 students from the best students from the whole world. But 2% of the revenue, 4% of the revenue comes from students. That's it.
But where's the rest coming? Like, is it?
Good question. I'll come to that. I'll come to that. I'll come to that. Second is MIT. It's a little less than 10%. Then MIT, Emory. Fourth is Yale. It's not a competition. I'm just giving you an idea.
Yeah. So would you want to reflect, because I do know United States has a WALE Act in place which incentivizes research universities and researchers as such, directly because of these subsidies that you're mentioning. Are you mentioning that a certain innovation bill of that kind is required at the policy level at India to incentivize formal
Let me
innovation?
come to that. Can you hold your question? It's an important question, but I'll come to that in just a moment, okay? Please, may I? Okay, Yale is a fourth line. It shows 14%. Harvard is a couple of bars down, Stanford, Harvard, all that, okay? And there are some 40, 50% on the right-hand side, okay? All right, let me first answer the question, where does the rest come from? I mean, almost everything on the left side is private universities. Okay? What does private mean? What do we mean by private? Private just means these guys get little or no government support. Some research contracts, but they are comparative. Okay? But they are not dependent on government subsidies for their operation. Now let's consider an average private university. Excuse me, I'm going to use the word private because unfortunately in India the word private has become so confusing because it includes two completely different kinds of things. Okay? Private in the sense of truly philanthropic organizations that are subsidized by charity. Okay? I went to schools, that's a very long Indian tradition where people of means in India created schools for children all over the country. The charitable trusts, DAV schools and all these schools, I'm sure in the south there must be many colleges and secondary schools which were run by charity, right? Some fees, but mostly by charity. They were done by donations. Today, the word private has been captured significantly, not entirely, by this for-profit concept, unfortunately. Now, think of those for-profit part of private. Where will that bar be in that? It'll be more than 100%, right? They have to collect more than 100% in fees from a student so they can make money, right? It's a completely different, and that's why I was suggesting that we need the data, because very few people in India actually have an idea where does, to answer your question, where does this money come from? How does Yale or Harvard or Emory or MIT run the, or Jindal, I suppose, that you probably have an idea where, how Jindal Global University works. How do these guys run? If only 14% is coming from the students, where the rest coming? Well, at Yale, 40%, 40% comes from philanthropy.
Which is probably after 200 years of being
300 years,
established.
300 years.
And probably in its earlier years, this map would have been very different.
Yes.
And so they've created a tradition and an environment, a cultural environment within society where contributions to research-based institutions has gained a certain momentum, and we're still not there.
Is NYU in that list?
Yes, NY is last. NY, but
Alumni, correct.
Mhm.
Essentially, probably the philanthropy includes.
That means 40%
people
is
by
still
students who
philanthropy.
graduated out from there.
Yeah. Alumni. It's mostly alumni. Yes. And it's alumni running, all these universities are alumni running universities. They are the guys.
The board is comprising of alumni.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is that valid, what Professor Gopinath is making, in terms of contributions from the students versus the other sources of funding, is that a valid one at the beginning of these universities? My sense is that in the beginning it came from endowments or philanthropic, instead of now more diffuse contributions coming from research and otherwise.
Yes.
So it's not the other way around in terms of students contributing in the beginning, say for example in some of the Indian private universities, then later on gaining credibility and then drawing in
Yes.
other sources of funding. So
I think your points are well taken, and I think the dynamics of this over the lifetime of the university has to be properly understood. But what does it imply for, the amount of money needed to deliver quality education is very large. I think Government of India is already probably at the upper limit of how much of its budget it can give to education. Because education is not the only bowl before them. There's healthcare, there's roads, there is all kinds of other demands.
We actually have an estimate of that number. During last month's BRICS summit, he announced that for their top 100 in their ranking, the amount per faculty member comes to about $1 million
There you
to
are.
be able to make it to that ranking.
Okay.
So
Well, it's one
$1 million, but I will put money next to talent.
Yeah. Well, that's
Okay,
a problem
you
too.
spend that $1 million to on people who are not from the top 10% of the class. You are feeding pearls
Yeah.
to those who should not be fed.
You're institutionalizing mediocrity.
Yeah. Talent and funding. Talent alone will go only so far, has to be funding. So I mean both, yes.
So
Your point
one
is well taken.
above average Chinese large universities budget is more than the budget of all Indian IITs put together. So one above average leading Chinese universities budget is more than all Indian IITs put together. That is the information that was.
This is the data. I had no trouble getting data for Chinese universities. I haven't been able to get data for Indian universities.
but how reliable is that data?
I don't know. This was done by my Chinese research assistant who translated everything. I think he did it honestly, but how reliable, I don't know. It looks credible that, look, blue bar is the state funding, it's been declining. The last year is 2009. And the tuition fees are the orange line, which is rising. And then the green one is other sources. A large number of top Chinese universities actually own business corporations. very large business corporation. Peking University, Tsinghua, all these schools have very large business corporations whose income goes to these universities to support their operations. But it's more complicated. What I'm saying is, but to reinforce your point, the amount of funding needed for quality education is very large. Nobody, I mean, of course, Germany and France essentially, French universities have had a lot of trouble in recent decades because they're almost completely dependent on government subsidy, and even a rich country like France can hardly support it. So you don't see that much from research coming out of French universities. In Germany, they have been able to raise some fees. UK, probably know the story. But the resource question, talent number one, resource number two. Number three, I was going to talk about governance systems of universities, though I'm kind of running out of time, so I should just say very briefly about governance. I'm sorry, I'm repeating Professor Darshan, you were here before, that there are two primary models of governance. There's bureaucratic form of governance. Bureaucratic structure is a very good structure from Kautilya to Weber about managing delivery of public goods and services. You need bureaucratic structures. For private goods and services, the business model is a relatively efficient way of delivering private goods and services. But when you come to education, of course, in a university, there are elements of university which can be run as bureaucracy, elements of university which can be run as on a business basis. But there are large elements of university for which neither bureaucracy nor market-based business solutions are efficient solutions. I don't have time to go into the details, but if you have comments or discussions of that, I'll be glad to talk about that. And faculty evaluation is a good example. We spend, as I'm sure you do, a great deal of time trying to figure out who is a good faculty member. How do you figure it out? It's not easy. You just can't count papers. You can't count, any shortcut to try to figure out who's a good faculty member is very difficult, because most imaginative and innovative faculty members are not necessarily nice people.
We'll have a separate conversation.
Now, this is not an encouragement for you not to be nice to these gentlemen sitting around us. What I'm saying is, innovation is very troublesome. Innovation is troublesome to most people. It's very inconvenient. I think you use the word disruption, So, you innovate, and what does that innovation consist of? That innovation consists of telling some gray-haired guy like me that, your theory is no good. There's a better idea. Who is going to assess your performance? That gray-haired guy is going to sit there and assess your performance. So when he's asked to do so, what is Shyam going to say? Shyam going to say, yeah, I think the work I did 50 years ago for which I became famous is really wrong. This guy's right. Thank you. Or not. See the problem? There's a huge conflict in evaluation of faculty. Can you handle it bureaucratically? Bureaucratic structure is a great structure to run the army, to deliver the police services, to get the streets cleaned, you know. Can you deliver it by market forces, by profit motive? You know? Well, you know, Yale spends, as you said, $500,000 million to educate each PhD. What do they get out of it? They don't get any revenue, no fees, spend a lot of money, and then the guy goes and teaches at Harvard. What do you get? Try apply market solution to it. Try apply profit motive and run this university efficiently. Okay? And if our apex institutions, whether it's IIT or Jindal or ISC, are not going to, you are obviously, but if they are not going to spend a lot of these resources on attracting and educating the best talent of India to prepare them for the life of the mind, you know, who's going to do it? Because what's happening in India right now, as you saw in the PhD figures, is somebody else going to educate the teachers, and I'll just hire them. But who's that somebody else? Please identify yourself. You see the problem here. At aggregate level, a couple of years ago when I was here, I tried to find if in India, for educating these 260 lakh children each year, do we have at least some estimate of how many teachers and professors of physics or mathematics or biochemistry or psychology or economics or anthropology or history or geography do we need each year? Somebody said go to Planning Commission, member education. I asked them and they said, oh, it's in Planning Commission planning document 11th plan. I said, I've read the 11th plan, it's not there. They said, oh, no, Applied Manpower Research Institute has the, go talk to them. Okay. Talk to Applied Manpower Research Institute director. He said, no, we are not into planning anymore. We are into market-based solutions. I said, you know,
Nupa.
If this is a public good, my economics 101 lesson was that market-based solutions don't work very well for public goods. They work fine for private goods, watches and coffee and clothes and cars, but not for public goods like education of teachers. In any case, I've spoken for too long, so I should stop. So, just to summarize, what I'm saying is that in education, in my opinion, we need to focus on three things. One, attracting the top student of every year's class into teaching. Even an illiterate farmer will save the best seed, best grain from his crop for seed. Even if he has to go hungry, eat less today, knows it's more important to save the best grain for next year's crop. Otherwise, it's going to be a disaster. What are we doing with our best seed? I hope I won't offend anybody in this room. We are sending them to business schools and engineering schools, okay, or banking. You know, making a loan doesn't require that much talent, or even trading stocks does not require that much, or bonds doesn't require that much talent. Average people can do that. Question is, They are, out of those 260 lakh babies, there are enough incipient Einsteins in India. Talent distribution all over the world is the same. The question is, what are we doing with those Einsteins? Let me stop here. Open up for discussion.
Thank you very much for that really very interesting and very thoughtful set of reflections. I appreciate the fact that you kept it as much conversational as possible. We'll have a good Q&A session. I just want to have one question about, one of the things I've seen, particularly in the US, and maybe you can reflect about it since you've studied in India in your early days, is that, I have seen in the United States pretty mediocre deans and presidents of universities. Meaning that, when I say mediocre, I didn't mean in an offensive sense, in the sense that they may not have, many of them are not necessarily, institutional innovators. There is a certain degree of continuity that is evolving and things are just already so good. I'm talking about the last couple of decades when I had the opportunity to meet and engage with them. And so my question really is, is there a point of time when institution attains a maturity where it almost doesn't matter who are the deans, the presidents, the people who are kind of running the show, or this has to be a constant endeavor. And on the contrary, I also see in India too at times, but also in other places, that there's a lot of laboriousness associated doing anything, and the change for it to happen is so difficult, notwithstanding that. So in a way, I jokingly elsewhere said that even if we can find the most mediocre, completely destructive individual in India and make him or her the president of, say, Harvard or Yale, his or her ability to destroy and undermine these institutions is so limited because things are so well established, deeply embedded as a part of its institutional culture.
Yeah. Let me add something to that, Raj. What these institutions do, there are certain functions on which faculty is given control. Mostly promotion, hiring, promotion, tenure, curriculum. Okay, because deans, department heads, presidents, vice chancellors cannot have the knowledge to figure out who to hire, who to promote, what to teach in the class. You hire good faculty and then you let them make those decisions. On the other hand, when it comes to administrative matters, and even some important academic matters, should Jindal have a school of law? Well, if you don't have a school of law, who would you ask? If you have faculty governance, you'll ask a school of engineering, business, or arts and sciences. Will they vote for a school of law? That vision of which departments, which schools to add, and which ones to cut out cannot come from the faculty. Those are very important academic decisions, and yet they have to come from outside the faculty. There are a lot of functions that faculty cannot do. Faculty, by and large, there are exceptions, but by and large, faculty are awful administrators. I never done administration in my life, which is fine, because I've stayed away from it because I think I have better things to do. But there are people who have been faculty and they take on administration. Obviously, you have Rick Levin, who knew very well, did for 20 years. He did a great job. He was not a great researcher, but he became a great president of YALE. Added many new ideas and restructure the university. In fact, he essentially rebuilt the whole campus, which had been neglected. The physical plant of the university had been neglected for centuries, and he kind of brought it back into, and the endowment and everything. So there are managerial aspects of this. So this question is a complicated question. Faculty democracy, yes, in a limited way. Okay? Administration needs to have, but administration cannot have say on everything. You know, I'll give you one more aspect of this. Anyway, let me skip that. I'll come back to it. Let's have more
Can
questions.
I
Yes.
add
Please.
to what Shyam's saying in
Mhm.
response to your question? I think if you have the structure and the processes in place, then, like you said, you put an idiot in charge also, and it might work. Think of the McDonald's model of fast food.
No, JNU
The
and
structure-
DU, Indian public universities
this-
have the structure and process well established.
No, not necessarily. If you think about what Shyam's saying in terms of faculty governance, that's part of the structure and process
all
I'm
there.
talking about.
Nobody's, that's all there. It's so detailed. In fact, if you look at the.
No, then you become the bureaucratic model. So, you
No,
know,
I'm saying
just
both
because
ways we are not efficient. I'm
No,
saying.
not necessarily. What I'm saying is if you think about McDonald's and you have the proper structure and the processes in place and the right training, then you put a student in charge of making the burger, or you put somebody else who's going to work there for
That's why
6
Haldiram's
months.
work here.
They-
So McDonald's model can
Right.
work for Haldiram's,
Right.
but it has not been able to translate into institutions.
No, I think it does. I think.
Give me an example in India. Which institution you will say is run effectively?
No, I would say the structure and process is not in place.
That's not good enough.
No, it is
No,
because
that's
we
not
are
good.
not studying
Right.
the structure and
No,
process.
but if
properly.
we can do a
No, when
if
we-
we can do a Haldiram, see what is Haldiram after all? There are several chains. They are all copied by McDonald's. It's the same thing model all over the country. You just do the same guys wearing the same cap, and they're just extension of McDonald's model. We do it very well. In fact, Haldiram is actually at some levels would be more efficient than
No, for example,
McDonald's.
no JNU. You might say that the vice chancellor is appointed by some undersecretary in HRD, right? That's not the proper structure or a process.
No, the
If you
president
think
of India
about-
appoints the vice chancellor.
Yeah, and who's advising the president
The
of
prime
India?
minister and
An
the council
undersecretary or a
ministers.
deputy secretary
Can
who
I
got in
I
somewhere.
think maybe we
You
are,
know, so when you think about structure and processes of faculty governance or things like that Shyam's talking about, they're very different from the kinds of structure and processes in JNU or places like that.
You'll be very
So,
surprised, Gopi.
I
If
don't
you look
think
at the IIM and IIT governance structure,
Yeah.
very,
And-
very organized.
Yes.
No, and how much IIMs and IITs had to fight with the government
Because
to
of
leave
the
them
structure,
alone.
I'm saying.
To leave them alone. Bad structure. They had to fight to get more control into their own fate. So I wouldn't agree with you.
Yeah, Professor Anand, I was talking to him in this conference of vice chancellors in Bombay that I addressed last week, and he said that IT Act is all of 2 pages long. 2 pages of law, I don't know, cannot have a whole lot in it.
No, they
Yeah.
after that. The way these structures and governance have evolved is based upon the Ministry of Human Resource Development having the control of the governance of this. Now, what I am trying to say is we can argue about whether what the governance is, but it is not true that the governance structure is not there. It is there. It is just that I see what we are really talking about is I believe it's a people problem as opposed to a policy problem. The major problem in India happens to be a people problem.
A large part of governance is in expectations, not written down, what we expect of one another. I'm going to say one more thing, then come to both of you. One of the differences I see between our education system and in US or UK is that if you're good, you know, the Peter Principle problem, if you're good as a faculty member, as a researcher, as a teacher, you'll get promoted. The only way to be recognized as being good is to be given administrative responsibility. You cannot be a great professor as a teacher and researcher, and because getting the administrative responsibility is a prerequisite for you to have enough resources and freedom and power. Okay, and once you get that, with some exceptions, obviously, most people find it very difficult to find time to do what they were very good at. That's the teaching and innovation. So the result that Indian press, does the public know who the great professors are in India? Do they ever see their names? No. Not unless they are given administrative responsibility. And at that point, they have most of the time, not always, ceased to be a great professor. They were, but now they have no time for that. You know, and in US and UK, even German universities, there's nothing more important than being a professor. And you don't have to take any administrative responsibilities.
Right.
So I think it's kind of,
Yeah, I think we
But
should broaden the
okay, let's see.
participation.
You had a question.
Some of the others, we can
I follow-
continue fighting endlessly, but
I follow Professor Sudarshan, maybe he's not.
Please.
No, I mean, in a larger sense, what you're talking about is, was famously stated as the Joseph Needham question.
Okay.
He did 17 volumes on science and civilization in China.
Okay.
All the wonderful innovations that China had, far in excess and ahead of Europe. And then suddenly something happened and it all stopped. Right? And so it remains a question. And now we see that it's almost as if leaders in China have heard you speak and have decided that they will do ABC and try and change things.
I wish I could take all that credit,
Yeah.
but not.
but it looks like I don't know whether these things are it's like at one level you could just say, well, that's how things are. I mean, we tried very hard to bring down fertility rates. Amartya Sen said it's because Kerala did it because of education, child mortality and all that. But fertility rate has secularly declined all over India. The only part where it remains high is here in Haryana. Other than that, it's come down without any effort. So maybe there are forces like that. I mean, so how are we to say you're going to pinpoint this and do ABC and then it'll change? I mean, we don't know.
So you're pointing to emergence. There would be
Emergence,
process of
right.
emergence.
Mm-hmm.
In the complexity of chaos theories, they have a conceptual basis to understand what you're saying. Professor, I want to make two prefatory statements. They're linked to what I will make in substantial information. I want to thank you for putting out so much information at the macro data about educational systems and finance, etc. on your website, which any one of you have not had the chance to should look at, because there's a lot of information that could provide a basis for having a conversation. And second, I want to highlight that you teach a course in management and literature.
Yes.
And why I highlight that will become obvious as I make the substantial point. My substantial point is, if I were to re-engage with your conceptual hierarchy, that is the talent, resource and governance, I would reverse that in a way for India, more from a subjective experience. Around the debate when Kapil Sibal was bringing the private universities bill, and there was a large debate in the media at that point of time, engaged debate, both here and from American professors started writing about it, who have been engaged for a long time in higher education. One of the things that emerged to me, and I'm no expert, is that resource is not such a big issue. The worry was that if we pour resources into the existing system, will it go down the drainage? And it seems to be a serious worry that
I agree.
That
I agree.
debtors-
Completely agree.
that deters public faith, and as a consequence, political investment in this. So that issue about resources. So I see resource as not such a significant issue in consequence that flows from lack of faith in the existing institutions, which in a large sense, when you pour resources into the public sector, will absorb the resources, the existing institutions which are dysfunctional, many levels of dysfunctionality we will get to. So I'll put governance on the top of it. Governance, of course, has multiple meanings, multiple dimensionality. What I meant is that the everyday manageriality of it. I mean, I don't believe in manageriality as an ideological concept, but I'm saying the everydayness of managing a public university. That's where we have serious challenge. I'm referring to Mintzberg kind of a manager versus an MBA, top-down versus more participatory. How do we reconcile all of these? There's very little study done in understanding in an anthropological or ethnographic sense as how public universities, which will consume most of the investment, actually work in their everydayness. That's a big challenge to us. That should, when we do that much investigation into this, that might build public confidence, and the consequences resource might come in. And when these institutions become important enough for us to research, might also drive talent into them. So if you get the governance right, to my mind, and the second aspect, and why I highlighted your literature and management, is to do with the fact pedagogy, the most ignored, neglected aspect. Now, in the Western world, from more rationalist, paradigmatic, enlightenment orientation of pedagogical styles, they have moved to where you are now, teaching literature, storytelling, more anthropologically oriented research, emphasis, one of shift of emphasis. I'm not saying abandoning one in preference to the other. Now, India has long oral traditions and resources, which goes back to my satyagraha and other things. The lack of confidence and faith, your post-colonial, political scientists would call post-colonial mindset, deters us from engaging with our own past, and thus deprives us of that kind of confidence to build institutions with some ambition. China, the ambition is present in plenty, and they very carefully draw upon their resources. They go back to their history, they go back to their particular experience. They're building institutions in combination of drawing from the West, sending out PhD students to you and bring them back, engage with them, bring that fusion, but with a certain sense of confidence. In India, our institutions and institutional leadership lack confidence. We are imitative, mimetic, and not really innovative in the real sense of innovation. So that's
well, thank you for those remarks. It's very interesting because let me ask a question. Start this by question. What is the oldest and most comprehensive university in the world? Where did the idea of a university originate? It's Takshila. Takshila was by far, not only the earliest, but the most comprehensive university. Nalanda came much later. I just listened a few days ago to Professor Shailendra Mehta of Auro University, who's writing a book about Takshila. This is not a book of opinions. He knows 9 languages, and a good part of what is known about Takshila is in Chinese and Tibetan manuscripts. But they're not available in India anymore. And it's mind-boggling. We do have history that we can go back to for inspiration. We just don't read it. You know, I've offered to give lectures on Arthashastra in Indian business schools. Nobody wants me to talk about Arthashastra. You know, Arthashastra is the best book, earliest manual on management, public administration mostly, but also private administration, on accounting, on auditing, and politics and public management. I'm giving you examples of the lack of self-confidence. You know, I can learn more about the Jain institutions or Buddhist institutions from workshops at Yale than I ever see here. And these are guys who have no cultural stake in India. These are Americans, men and women professors who are who dig up these things and read about them and analyze them. I'm just endorsing very much. I'm very much on these, and I hope some of you get a chance to look at Professor Mehta's work on Takshila. It's really mind-boggling. Please.
So I had a question regarding the analogy you were making in how the know-how of a car changes at different levels, and then the innovation taking place in software, for instance, in India. And you must be aware of the work by Nirmal Kumar, who has written also this book called Invisible Innovation, in which he says that this kind of innovation is slowly taking place in India. So what his idea is that the lower rung jobs will be outsourced first, but it's not sustainable in the long run for companies not to outsource the higher rung jobs along with them as well. So many companies in software specifically have very recently started to shift their R&D from California to Bangalore and Chennai, which does not simply just does the lower end outsourcing jobs, but actually engages in R&D, which is actually where the innovation is taking place. So what Nirmal Kumar and his body of work, which is published all across, including Harvard Business Reviews and others, tries to show that the innovation in India that takes place at that level is rather invisible, because A, it is B2B, so we don't really get to know about it, and B, while it was earlier taking place in California by Indians, now these Indians are doing it in India because these enterprises are being offshored back into India, and so that innovation thing is big. I'm not trying to dispute what you're saying, because I do understand and sort of actually entirely agree with the idea that innovation is a problem in innovation as such. Culture in India, as well as like the startup mode and in the country today, is largely driven on software services. Not even one hardware equipment goes to the venture capitalists to begin with. But I wonder, how would you tackle that defense of innovation?
Well, thank you for this comment. I'll make two remarks. One, personally, at my age, I don't really complain about respect for gray hair. So I won't discourage you from respecting gray hairs, but I think that's a problem in India. As I mentioned earlier, there's too much respect for the old, for the age, rank, as opposed to ideas and innovation. And a man or woman should be evaluated on the basis of their contribution, and not on the basis of their seniority and age and all that. And unless we kind of reduce the emphasis on age and rank, which has to do with the bureaucratic form of governance, it's linked to the bureaucratic form of governance. Unless we reduce that, and if some bright young person, one of you comes up with a great idea, and you say, okay, Shyam, your time is over. Now he's going to take over.
I was at a Vice Chancellor's conference organized by Pramad Sinha.
Okay.
And I said one of the nice things for me is to have a young boss.
Yeah, of course.
He's only 40.
Yeah.
And after I finished speaking, somebody said, I feel very sorry for you, how pathetic. You have such an inexperienced boss as the Vice Chancellor of a university. I feel very bad for you.
Yeah.
No, actually, in fact, in India, the age is a very important factor for everything, because the number of in the UGC's merit promotion scheme, the number of years of work experience is the sole criteria for automatic promotion. So, if from what they call lecturership to senior lecturership to professorship, 8-year gap is the key thing. Everything is evaluated on the number of years of experience, and many of them have a clear term limit. Now I am 40. When I was appointed as Vice Chancellor, I was 34. So, I would be ineligible to be even a lecturer in most Indian universities in the framework which we have. Of course, there's always a provision which even those days they had. In fact, Upendra Baxi was the person was appointed as a professor like that, where there's a provision, even at that time in the vision, even in central universities, a distinguished scholar could be appointed as a full professor. But that same distinguished scholar is not eligible for a lecturer.
That's right.
But he can be appointed, he or she can be appointed as a full professor. So there is that, framework.
Raj, this is not to make you feel bad, but you may have heard of Robert Maynard Hutchins.
Yes.
He became the dean of Yale Law School at 29.
I know.
And at 31, he was hired to become the president of University of Chicago, and went on to transform the University of Chicago
And also higher
By-
education in America.
and higher education, intellectual transformation. But why Robert Maynard Hutchins? How old was Shankaracharya?
I know.
No, but in Sankaracharya's time, life expectancy was 35. And
They had to catch him young.
therefore, a young person, you know,
They had to catch him young.
You sound like Hardy. You know, Hardy's. Some of you may have read Hardy's obituary of Ramanujan.
Yeah.
Now, Ramanujan, the mathematician, he died at the age of 32. And Hardy, his closest friend and collaborator and mentor, not mentor, but he wrote in his obituary what a great tragedy it was that such a brilliant mathematician died at this young age. But he said, for a mathematician, it's not that big a tragedy. Because very few mathematicians do anything important after 30.
That's empirically true. 25 is the.
So, but I think that issue of using age as a proxy for talent or wisdom or ability, what are we going to do about that?
But it's not confined to academia, actually.
No, not just academia,
In
but
India,
in
all
academia it's more
positions.
important.
Yeah, that's right.
In
In the
academia,
private
I
sector,
think-
it is challenged. But if you look at judges, for example, in the
Mhm.
courts,
Mhm.
in our courts, huge. In fact, the Constitution of India doesn't have the age of a 50 as a critical factor for moving somebody into the High Court. But then there's an informal understanding that the Supreme Court of India has evolved over the last 2 decades, that if you're not 50, you will not be considered for appointment as a High Court judge.
And the ridiculous system where I believe some Chief Justice served for 9 days
Yeah.
or something
It's a
like that.
seniority-based
I mean,
system.
nobody should be in that position unless they're going to be around for at least 5 years.
no, but he
But
benefits
nobody
retirement
serves for 5
benefits.
years too, because there's a fixed retirement age.
No, but Japanese society has been able to meld the two with respect for age and
Mhm.
sustaining innovation and creativity and all
I'm
that.
not complaining about respect
And-
for age, by the way.
And so, no, what I'm saying.
You're
is
okay. We will respect you, Gopi. We have respected you and will continue.
No. He's talking about grey hair. I don't have hair, so that's a different problem.
But
All right.
see, my problem is actually, Shyam, very different. Most of the time, I am in a situation where I am when I entering into meetings, the person who is hosting us is typically waiting for the Vice Chancellor, because I am normally the assistant who is supposed to be accompanying the Vice Chancellor. Let me meet the Vice Chancellor. Who is the real guy? You have come, but where is the Vice Chancellor? So that is how I typically start many of my meetings.
For a small price, I'll lend you my hair. Okay, questions, comments, please. We need to.
We had others who were.
Anamika?
Yes, I didn't come to your question. Go
I
ahead.
think you addressed it to a large extent by thank you for this very interesting conversation. So I primarily teach at the law school, but I started floating an election in the business school and IT licensing, and so I've been an area of technology commercialization. So my question was on the innovation aspect, and what kind of a significant role do universities play in actually commercializing the research and then contributing to say the sectors that you mentioned. But just as a brief, maybe seeking a clarity, given the kind of informal economy we have, measurable for the talent that you, the component of talent that you just measured, per se, identifying who is this incipient genius that the universities need to track and then map? Because at the governance level, even at the national IP policy level, to have them tracking this informal innovator at various levels, they are in the villages. They do not have access to these high-end elite universities also. But they make it with a lot of other support and maybe somebody who's been generous and has been looking out for them. So how do you say would the measurable for talent in that subset in your list of concepts fit in?
Very interesting. Several comments. One, Kautilya asked the civil servants, when you go to the villages, look out for talented young people. And if you locate them, bring them to the capital. So they will be the king's civil servants. So he specifically talks about this. So civil service will not consist entirely of the sons, sorry, no daughters, but of courtiers, to bring talent. Because talent is distributed all over the country. So yes, you have to go and look for talent. That's why the access to system of higher education to a broad segment of people, even those who may not have been well educated in the Mufassil, is very important, right? But your main issue that you're raising, I'm sure I'm missing your main point.
The RICO is essentially the way you're mapping United States, China, and India, and the levels of PhDs, and then how many universities are being funded, etc., etc. So all of this mapping becomes very formalized when you have the data in place. And the first problem is then we do not know who are these geniuses. If you ask us, who is this famous professor, we are remembering some vice chancellors from after various years. But I'm looking at technology, a talented person who created not maybe an operating system, but a technology which functions for that.
As far as technology from universities is concerned, I'm very supportive of this technology, but universities have been even better in doing basic science. When it comes to applied technology and university-based entrepreneurship, it has achieved great results in American universities, but it is not entirely without certain concerns, okay? And I want to, since everybody knows the positive aspect of this, I'm going to talk a little bit about those concerns. Okay. As a professor, what is my obligation to my students? If this morning, I get a new idea. When I go to my class at 1 o'clock, do I share it with my students or not? Do I give them my very best or wait till the patent is granted? You see the conflict?
Before my paper gets published.
Oh, but paper gets published, right?
People steal ideas.
Yeah. Am I doing the very best for my students? So I would say, I know it may sound somewhat jarring to some people in the room. I would say instruction, superb instruction, great teaching, inspired teaching, doing the very best to teach and inspire our students. That is number one by far in my book. Research, publication, all that. It's important, but it's a derivative and a supportive function for great teaching. What society out there expects from us in the universities in exchange for their great support they provide in various forms, the regard they give us, the freedom they give us to do what we wish with our time and a lot of resources. what we owe them is first priority of loyalty to our students, that I'm going to give them my very best and nothing less. I think when faculty do that, research comes. Research also comes. If we choose faculty who are interesting and interested in the subject matter, they will come up with ideas. And the most obvious way of, perhaps easier way of assessing them is through assessing their teaching. Not by popularity ratings by students, by the way, but something more substantive than that. And teaching evaluation can easily be reduced to something actually quite mechanical. That's not what I mean. If we do the best teaching, attract the best, contribute as much as we can to development of each one of our students to their highest potential. That potential may be different for different students. This student will achieve this student will achieve this will achieve this, they'll go in different directions. Am I contributing my very best to their, I think everything else in the university will take care of it. Please, there's nothing beyond teaching, and it's such a, I don't know how many of you have seen, I think it's Gilbert Hyatt's book. What's the title of his book? The Noble Profession, or something like that. Gilbert Hyatt, Highet. And I feel so privileged to be in this noble profession. Okay? And I think that Indian tradition of a poor Brahmin is not that far off the mark. As a teacher, I don't want to make it caste-based. That what the Brahmin was. I tried to persuade my mother, my late mother, that I become a Brahmin. So whatever she wants to give, she should give to me, because then I teach. I couldn't succeed in persuading her to change her mind. but that as teacher, I think there's a conflict between wealth, between Lakshmi and Saraswati. We should be able to expect our middle class, lower middle class existence and be driven by life of the mind, the richness. Okay? As you said, I have the good fortune. They said, okay, I'm an engineer. I was trained as an engineer. I teach management, economics, finance, accounting all my life. Now I teach also, in addition, Macbeth and Antigone, and it's fun, it's enjoyment, and having the chance to explore those things and learn throughout our lives new things in the university. It's a very special privilege. And does it matter whether I have a fancy car or a big house? Well, it doesn't matter to me. I'm not deprived. I don't feel deprived. This is not an argument for not providing the reasonably good salary to the teachers. But that's not the point. The point is to attract the most capable young people in our society and get them to see that there is a life of the mind possible. And there are people, and it's very enriching. It's so enriching. Because, I see the best IT kids go to IIM Ahmedabad or Bangalore, and the best of them get hired by the banks and Hindustan Lever and so on, and they sell soap for 5 years and say, oh, am I doing? You know, they get tired. You know, they have too much intellectual capacity to be excited about it. You know, this thing becomes, you know, but nobody told them through their school years, you know, Ramesh, you are exceptional. Think of a life of the mind. Think about PhD. Think about graduate. At least PhD, I don't must master's degree at least, you know. Think about teaching. Think about research. Their parents have not told them. And even their teachers have not told them. I got pulled into PhD program because of my teachers at Carnegie Mellon. I went there to the MBA program. At the end of about 6 weeks, 3 of the professors came, talked to me, and they said, would you join our PhD program? I said, I'll think about it. And they came back a few days later. They said, oh, we'll give you a fellowship. Now my eyes became very big. So, you know, so they said, and we'll forgive the loan we gave you for the MBA program. Okay, I said, okay, you sold me on that. So I joined the PhD program. And 2.5 years, I finished my MBA and PhD and went on to the rest of my life. But if they had not suggested to me, why didn't you do this? I would have probably finished my MBA and then gone on to sell soap. I'm not against soap, you know, but anyway, I don't know if I have addressed any part of your
No,
question.
certainly you did.
All right, thank you.
But you will be happy to know that a lot of IITians have refused international jobs just to come back and make in India. So maybe we're looking to nurture that kind of innovation here.
And
Not
in
selling
fact,
soap, but innovating.
in fact, in my batch in Ahmedabad, out of 250, I think 150 had, after 5 years, they have started their own. So these changes are happening in IIMs.
But you will find them in doing entrepreneurship, but then I think we need to also raise a very big issue, which is something which we have not covered. Talking about being part of academia, there is something fundamentally disproportionate and disparities regarding the academic aspirations of salary structures of faculty and the possibilities of making money through working in banks and corporations and companies, or for that matter starting business. Although their motivation to start business is an entrepreneurial thing, but the money is significant. I mean, it's a different ball game. So in some ways we have to raise the question that which we can't avoid, which is the fact that the motivation for people to go into academia need to be beyond the possibility to make a lot of money.
Exactly,
And
exactly. And you don't want, if people are coming to academia primarily for money, I'm sorry, you're getting the wrong people.
But if I can,
Or we're getting the wrong profession. You are looking at the wrong profession.
if I can connect it back to your 1991 liberalization and how that's dropped PhDs, thanks to the 1991 liberalization, people like Shiv Nadar, Naveen Jindal and Azim Premji made a lot of money and have put it back into good universities
Wonderful.
which are doing good for higher education. So, I think this is a very
We
complex
want more.
kind of an issue that we need to think about.
And
Oh,
we
no
want
doubt about
more
that.
Shiv Nadars, we want more Jindals, we want more
Right.
Premji. I've visited, this is the third one actually,
Oh, great.
of these 3 that I'm visiting. I have had the chance to visit all of them, Ajim Premji University in Bangalore and Shiv Nadar in Chennai, and that's wonderful. Only thing remains to be done. No, I shouldn't say only thing, it's a big thing. To spread that infection, and recover that glorious past in which that was the norm, that people of wealth put their money into educational
And
institutions.
Brahmins went to the schools to teach, not to
Yes.
the corporations.
That's right. the very best, because went in there to to do that. So, spreading that infection. In fact, last couple of years, I've been trying to propose and persuade people, and maybe this is as good a place to talk about this as any other, is to create an association for advancement of higher education in India. This will be an association of truly philanthropic institutions and trusts who are interested in delivering quality education through philanthropy funding, and bring Shivnadars and Jindals and Premjis and many others. There are many trusts, 100-year-old, in India, operating
Particularly in the
parts of
colleges.
colleges, to bring them together so they become a force in education in India. That is not to take anything away from publicly funded universities, but I think Indian education needs a counter movement, counter force to the profit-making enterprise, because that carbon dioxide is going to kill us. It is killing us. It's not that there's nothing we can do about it. We can, and you are doing in this campus and several other campuses. I spent several days at Ahmedabad University, which is trying to do the same thing. Ahmedabad Education Society, as you know, from 1934, has been creating these philanthropic institutions. They are such good institutions and good people and good intent. They need to get together. They could become a resource center, provide a model. You start from scratch. Ajim Premji starts from scratch. Shiv Nadar starts from scratch. There's no place you can go to get advice how to do this, how to do it right. Okay? What about creating an association which has a common resources? Say, you want to build a campus, you want to build a curriculum, you want to build a student body, you want to build alumni, you want to build this. Here, we'll help you. We'll provide the services to help you do this.
And so as a small measure, the International Institute for Higher Education Research and Capacity Building, which is hosting this talk of yours, one of the objectives of that institute was, besides the research part of it, is actually contribute towards capacity building,
Right.
as well
That's
as
exactly
having conversations about it. And I think what you said is so true, because it's the brackets of name calling, public, private, deemed, state, central, is really problematic, because it doesn't really help when people who wanted to create these institutions, because the heart of the big issues that you talked about, be it in terms of talent or resources or governance, they need to be there for all of them, regardless of whichever regulatory structures that you can care to evolve.
Okay.
And in the Indian context, the so-called private is really not private at all. From creation to evolution to running, we are so dependent upon the state's power. It's really not at all private. In fact, the colleges and high schools are, when you call themselves private, they have a greater degree of autonomy, out of the state. But when you call a university private, doesn't really mean anything. The education secretary of the government of Haryana is a member of the governing body of the university, sits in the board of management of the university. Even to start a small little undergraduate program, we need to go through a committee process within the government of Haryana to secure their permission. So there's so much of regulatory structure already there for the regulating higher education. So I think it's this idea that you talked about. Some conversations happen. One of the problems that we have is
There
that
seems to be more demand, say, from Afghanistan for that kind of advice than from
that's
India.
right. That's right.
Well, I'll share with you my proposal, just a few pages.
That's
and,
great.
to
Wonderful.
extend-
No, we should. And I think it's. I always.
We need to join forces.
Yeah. No. I have. We are very fortunate that most of our greatest supporters historically has been from people. Of course, the very creation was Naveen Jindal. But if you look at all the collaborators and our partners and people who have trusted us, have all been from overseas. it's just extraordinary that this institution has grown so much because of the institutional and individual support from people outside India as opposed to people within India.
Raj, I just want to get to a situation within my lifetime that people will come from US to seek advice here
Absolutely.
for Bretta University.
That's a very good I have a dream conclusion. We will work on that.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
We want to present a small token of appreciation for your visit. This is a memento.
Oh, thank you.
This is the official scarf of our university, which
Oh,
will be more useful for the New Haven winters because we never had winters in India this time.
you know,
So
you were wearing one.
I was wearing, but now I am.
Now
not
I can sit there.
This is a small memento which will be useful for you because you're a professor.
Okay.
This has a 4 GB pen drive. It has a laser pointer.
Okay.
It has a pen, and you can use this. And it has the name of our university, and it is nicely made in China.
And it transmits directly to the CIA.
CIA sent me here.
That's right. That's right. Anybody who is on a plane from US to India is actually CIA missionary.
Oh, oh my.
This is something for, there's a connection to the flag. Our Chancellor Naveen was a student in the United States at the University of Texas in Dallas, and he flew the Indian flag and the American flag. He was also part of the Students' Union there. And when he returned to India nearly 2 decades ago, he attempted to fly the Indian flag, and not on those special days, and he was prosecuted for that. Because the then Indian law prohibited private individuals to fly the national flag on general days.
I was going to ask you on your car this morning.
No,
I didn't know
so
about
he
the change.
challenged that law,
Uh-huh.
and it took 10 years from the lower court to the high court to the Supreme Court. Ultimately, in a landmark decision known as Union of India versus Naveen Jindal, the Supreme Court upheld the right to fly the national flag for private Indian citizens. And since then, he set up the Flag Foundation of India, and he put up 50 flags across different parts of the country, including a big flag at the Connaught Place. If you go to the central part of Delhi, there's a big flag. And he also donated a flag to the government of Afghanistan. So if you go to Kabul, one of the big flags in the
So it's a copy of the flag here.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. So the idea was, and he contributes to that context. And for him, a flag is not just about a symbol of India, but what it stands for. And that's why in our library, we decided to put the flags of all the countries of the world, including aspirational entities and Palestine and regional organizations and all of that, with the collective consciousness of the humanity, the UN flag at the center. So that is a sort of short flag story.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you to all.